Hello and welcome to Out of the Fog. I'm Karen Hager. Each week at this time, we gather for a spiritual conversation with enlightening guests, and I'm glad you are here. You can learn more about my work as an intuitive and teacher at KarenHager.com, and you can find me on Instagram, where I'm Fog City Psychic, for more Out of the Fog content, photos of Maisie the puppy, because who doesn't love Maisie the puppy, and other little glimpses into my happy, wacky life. Now then, committing to the way of the sacred feminine means making time for silence and reflection and tending to our inner lives. Christine Valters Paintner is my guest today, and she believes that embracing the wisdom of Mary, the Blessed Mother, and her many faces is one way to welcome the sacred feminine into our lives. She's here to share some familiar and unfamiliar names of Mary, expressed as archetypes that are shared across cultures, to open pathways of creativity, healing, and justice. Are you ready to meet her? Christine Valters Paintner, PhD and Registered Expressive Arts Consultant and Educator, is the online Abbess of abbeyofthearts.com. That's a virtual monastery and global community. The Abbey offers online programs and retreats to help integrate contemplative practice and creative expression. Christine's the author of 18 books on spirituality, including her most recent, Birthing the Holy, Wisdom of Mary to Nurture Creativity and Renewal. Christine, welcome to Out of the Fog.
Thanks, Karen. It's lovely to be here with you again.
I know it was years ago, and I'm so glad to have you back. This book touches something very personal in me because of my own feeling of a special connection with Mary. Maybe I'll just start by asking, though, what does it mean to birth the holy into our lives? There's a way of thinking about it where the holy is always with us. So what does it mean to birth the holy?
Well, yeah, I do believe that the holy is always with us. And I also think that we are called to co-create with that divine presence, to bring that holiness into its fullness over and over and over again. So birthing the holy for me is saying yes to that call the way Mary did, to be in partnership with the sacred, to be able to see the sacred, in all aspects of our lives, and to also say yes to those creative, upwellings and uprisings, and see them as divine in origin and as contributing to a world of greater compassion and justice.
That invites us to honor things that aren't always on, that we don't always take time to honor in our regular lives.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole book is about what does it mean to integrate the pathway of the sacred feminine into our spiritual lives. And for me, that's a multifaceted question, I suppose, or task, or set of tools. And you mentioned a bit about spending time in silence and having time to really listen within, and certainly that's an aspect of it. And we have the story in scripture of Mary pondering these things in her heart and being a kind of symbol of that quiet reflection, or Mary as Our Lady of Silence. But there's also aspects of the feminine, such as cultivating a relationship to our intuition. So not always relying solely on our rational, linear planning side of our minds, and really allowing that more intuitive knowing to take the lead sometimes, especially I think when we're in this partnership with the divine. And it comes through intuition, it comes through body wisdom, it comes through our dream life. There's an honoring in the sacred feminine path of that more feeling centered and that kind of compassionate way of being in the world that brings empathy to to our relationship to others and to those that we do other to try and understand their life experience. I think the sacred feminine invites us into that relationship in a different kind of way. And that sense of really organic unfolding and ripening. So less again about planning and list making and achieving, but really listening to what's arising in my own heart, in my own being, and helping to bring that to fruition, trusting that as a sacred message in my life. Yeah.
And it's just, I'm thinking about how, so I grew up Presbyterian, and I always say that we were in my family, my sister and I we were Presbyterian for the donuts, because if we went to church and we were good, we got donuts afterwards. So I had kind of a sugar-based relationship with Protestant Christianity. And then as I got older, I left the church, and as I got older, I had a strong and passionate connection with Mary that eventually led me into the Episcopal Church. And one of the reasons I was nervous about Mary is that the way that I thought of her as a little Presbyterian for the donuts child is that she represented passive femininity. She represented cartoon sacrifice, right? She represented standing there looking like a Barbie with her hands open down at her sides, and that we as women were supposed to be like her. The Mary I found in my own experiences and prayer and spiritual life, and certainly the Mary that I find in this book, is not that plastic Barbie Mary, is it?
No, exactly. I mean, I think that passive image is certainly one that has been upheld by the patriarchal church as a way to get women to comply. And yet when we start to dig just a little bit beneath the surface, we find, all these identities of Mary, as the fierce mother and the protector, and the one who goes into the underworld with us, and the one who, Mary, Mother of Sorrows, is one of my favorites. And, just to really enter in with our imaginations to the sorrows that Mary herself would have experienced, especially, of course, watching her adult son be murdered, and to have to sit there and be present, and knowing that experience ripened something in her that allows her then to be present to us in the world, in our own sorrows and our own devastating losses, that Mary has been through it, basically. She is human. So yeah, she has that experience of grief and loss, but also power and fierceness and guidance and wisdom and all of those beautiful qualities.
And in this book, you're exploring Mary as an archetype, not as a cliche, which is the plastic Barbie standing, you know what I mean? My glow in the dark light up Virgin Mary nightlight, but as an archetype that takes some of the power of that story wherever we meet her across cultures, that takes power of that story and kind of transmutes that into power in the realm of spirituality. Right? Mary, the gate of heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, right? Where it takes what happened in her life as we see it in the documents we have, and changes that into something bigger, working on our lives at a deeper level.
Yeah, this sense of archetypes, is something that Jung described as essentially these invisible energies that exist across cultures and traditions, that show up in our dream life and show up in our in our own imagination, and show up, of course, in our storytelling. And there are these kind of imprints on us of these different energies or ways of being in the world. And what archetypes offers to us or invites us into is an enlarged way of being, and a more expansive presence in the world, because we don't then just limit ourselves to one sort of face. I know for example, I know a lot of people who are, in ministry, who are pastors or spiritual directors, and they identify a lot, of course, with that compassionate caregiver archetype. And that is a beautiful thing, and there's a lot of gifts in that. And it can also be a little stifling if that's your whole identity, right? And so Mary invites us to expand that by considering these other aspects that we all carry within us. Some of us will identify more with than others. And oftentimes some of the archetypes we resist may be part of our shadow side, that Jung described, those parts of us that go unclaimed and that are rich resources for our own, spiritual maturity and growth.
What drew you into this exploration of digging in and wanting to find when you get the book, listeners, you'll see that this is 31 names of Mary, but also with beautiful poems that Christine wrote, beautiful art. What drew you into exploring it this way?
Well, it's kind of a multi-year process and relationship of growing in my own intimacy with Mary, starting, with my mother dying about 20 years ago, and discovering needing to find a new relationship to mother and being drawn to Mary in that sense, but also, that my own ambivalence around her kind of very plastic, limited depiction in the church. And then as I went through my grief, discovering, Mary, Mother of Sorrows, and, Mary who meets us in those places. And then essentially what happened was about 3 years ago, I went to Chartres. I was invited by the Viriditas Labyrinth group to lead a retreat there. And I encountered Notre Dame sous terre. There's a lot of Mary images in that cathedral because, of course, it's Notre Dame, dedicated to Our Lady. But there is a statue in the crypt. Notre Dame sous terre means Our Lady of the Underworld. And I just absolutely fell in love with her because I had already been familiar with the underworld journey through my own grief. And I had, written about it and, taught courses on what that meant. And I hadn't actually encountered Mary's face in that kind of aspect of her. And so I would go down and sit with her in that little chapel, and she's one of the Black Madonnas, which are these beautiful depictions of Mary all across Europe and really across the world, but a large number of them are in Europe, of Mary with the dark skin and that sense of connection to what maybe white Europeans consider to be otherness, but I think really is an invitation into that darkness as holy, and darkness as birthing place, and darkness as the place of radical transformation. And soon after I came back from that trip, Ave Maria Press said, "Oh, would you be interested in writing a book on Mary?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I've been thinking about all these different names that Mary carries, and yes." Basically, I didn't have to think about it at all. And a lot of it comes also just from my own interest in Jungian work and archetypes, and beginning to I chose 31 of her names, but I could have chosen twice as many if I had wanted to to keep going. But I wanted to make it a manageable book, although I do have another list that I've already started in case I ever decide to do part 2. So
Oh, I love it. One of my favorite is Greenest Branch. And I wonder if you, and especially in the times that we're going through now, I wonder if you can say a little bit about Mary as the greenest branch, just because she's my favorite and because I'm doing the interview. So that's why.
Sure. That's perfectly fair. I love that image too, because I have a very close connection to St. Hildegard of Bingen, who is the woman who coined this term. So Hildegard was a 12th century Benedictine abbess in Germany. And she was a remarkable woman. She did all kinds of things, wrote all kinds of things, but she wrote a lot of liturgical music for the Liturgy of the Hours, that the cycle of prayers that the monks and the nuns would pray. And she also coined this term viriditas, which is a Latin word, and it essentially means the greening power of God. And for Hildegard, she could see this greening power present and alive all around her in creation. And if you ever go to the Rhine Valley in Germany, you can see this greening aliveness, in every direction. Of course, it's very much here where I am in Ireland too. But it's not just a physical reality, it's also a spiritual reality. So for her, it was also a way to look at the state of the soul. So those of us who are on a spiritual path of healing and wholeness, there'll be more greening or viriditas flowing through us. And for her, Mary and the saints and the virtues and the angels, all of those kind of spiritual beings, were kind of the embodiment of the fullness of that spiritual greening. And in one of her pieces of music for the Liturgy of the Hours, she composes a song called O Viridissima Virga, which means O greenest branch. And she, has this beautiful poetry, around, you who come forth, from the windy blast of the questioning of saints. You blossomed your branches, feel the warmth of the sun distilled in you, a fragrance like balsam. So this beautiful sense of Mary being a guide to our own greening. So one of the questions we could ask ourselves is, where do I feel that greening aliveness? And where does that feel blocked in my life? Where do I feel its opposite, that dryness, the aridity that Hildegard also talked about? And of course, for her, the spiritual and the physical were not disconnected. They were intimately intertwined. So our spiritual health and wholeness is intimately connected to our physical health and wholeness. So we can ask that question about the greening of our lives on multiple levels. And then, of course, the physical and spiritual on the individual level is also connected to the cosmic level. So, it's a potent question for our times. Are we contributing to the greening and the flourishing of all creation around us? And of course, the answer to that question on a collective level is obviously not.
Yeah.
So it's a good, I think it's a really rich image for us to pray with. How are we, I think for her too, there, how are we depleting ourselves? I think when we physically buy into like the busyness of capitalism and productivity and all of that, that we're contributing to that basically destruction of the natural world when we allow ourselves to slow down and basically embrace these qualities of the sacred feminine, invite in that greening power. We're also then more in harmony with the actual rhythms of creation. And so our lives will be, the more we speed up, the more we end up shopping, the more we end up driving, the more we end up, basically exploiting, Earth's resources because we're living so mindlessly. So slowing down has a way of really opening up the possibilities for bringing that greening back into our own lives, but also into the lives of the collective and the cosmos.
You're listening to Out of the Fog, and I'm talking with Christine Valters Paintner. Her new book is Birthing the Holy, Wisdom from Mary to Nurture Creativity and Renewal. You can find out more about Christine and her work at abbeyofthearts.com. Is there a name of Mary in this book that was especially challenging to you, especially difficult to connect with or write about?
Probably not particularly difficult because I did get to choose.
Because you were the queen of it, right?
there were other names that I didn't choose. And of course, if you ask me what one of those was, I'm not sure one would come to mind right away. But I definitely some of them I had to pray with a little bit longer to sort of really lean into, what was this aspect of Mary? For some, for some of them, the the image really called to me, but I wasn't quite sure why or quite sure what Mary was inviting. So I think that, maybe woman who clothed the sun, she who's woman of the apocalypse, was one that was slightly more challenging because I'm not really drawn to apocalyptic energy, even though or imagery, I should say, even though we're clearly living in apocalyptic times. And by that, I mean that the root of the word apocalypse means unveiling or to pull back the veil. So I think the more I spent time with that, the more I began to appreciate the wisdom that comes in that imagery, and in understanding, what it is we're experiencing right now. And I don't see time as linear. I see it as a circle. Nature teaches us that time is always in rhythms and circles and cycles. So we're not moving to the end times. Well, we might be, but there's always going to be the beginning times that are woven together into that.
And that Mary clothed with the sun is difficult for me too. And I was thinking, as I was getting ready to talk to you, about one of the aspects of that sun, though, is being able to look at what is scary, being able to look at what might seem like an end, with courage, and maybe with that understanding, as you're saying, that endings and beginnings are all jumbled up together. One of the things, when I got away from my plastic Mary, one of the things that I love about her is that courage in the face of unimaginable loss and sorrow and change.
Yeah, absolutely.
You pulled names from different traditions. So we might be used to thinking of Mary from the Roman Catholic tradition. You drew in Islamic and from the Eastern Orthodox traditions. Can you say a little bit about, especially if there's anybody listening who's thinking, this isn't for me, I'm just in this for the donuts, I don't know. How does Mary's presence speak across cultures and ways of looking at her?
Well, yeah, it wasn't until I started writing the book that I was actually really aware of how significant a presence Mary was in the Quran. I mean, there's actually more written about her in the Quran than there is in the New Testament or the Christian scriptures, which I found, just kind of startling in a delightful way, because it meant that it sort of felt to me like an affirmation of Mary's archetypal presence and reality and value, that in the Islamic tradition, and in some ways, I would say probably much like more traditional Christian narratives, I'd say there's probably Islamic, more traditional narratives where Mary is much more the image of that kind of docile virgin sort of self. But she actually has several different names and in Islam. So I was just sort of delighted by that sense of her appearing again across religious traditions. And then the Eastern Orthodox, they have loads of images of Mary, and they really revere her in some beautiful ways, and some incredible imagery of her. So that was really delightful as well. And I think I'm very drawn to that Eastern Orthodox sort of imagination and way of understanding Christianity from a slightly different perspective, slightly more of that Eastern perspective. It was really just a delightful journey to open this book up even further, so that it didn't become a book that people thought, oh, this is just for Catholics, which is not what I meant it for. Right. I mean, Catholics are welcome, but so are anybody else who's interested, in her, in that sacred feminine presence and how she appears in these different forms.
For someone who hasn't met Mary in this way, or met the sacred feminine in this way, how can they begin to make that connection, to give that invitation?
Well, I think I think there is a little bit of a kind of a leap of faith that has to happen, a little bit of a trust, in the intuition, in the imagination. But I think if you're just willing to give it a little bit, of space in your life, I think my experience is that you then begin to discover how your body knows things that your mind doesn't, or that
Mm.
your dream life gives you symbols and information that your waking mind doesn't. And part of the journey is simply to show up and to ask, simply to say, Mary, I want to be in deeper relationship with you. I want to learn what the sacred feminine has to offer to me. Can we have a friendship?
Mhm.
And that it just up in that very simple level of opening your heart, um, to Mary or to the sacred feminine in whatever guise you want to address her. And, you could choose one of these 31 names as a place to start, as a as a doorway, gate of Mary is gate of heaven. I like to
Yeah.
think of thresholds a lot, and Mary standing at that threshold, welcoming you across into this more expansive way of understanding and praying and, yeah, moving through the world.
Mm. I wonder if you can say a little bit about abbeyofthearts.com. What is a virtual monastery?
A virtual monastery is essentially a contemplative community that exists primarily online. So we don't have a physical space. Often when you think of monastery, you think of a building that you would go to, um, with monks and nuns. But our community exists more in the imagination, so more as an idea, there's a concept, and through practice. So we gather together, in a variety of ways through online retreats, and we have contemplative prayer services. Before COVID, we even had some in-person pilgrimages, but those are sort of on hold indefinitely at the moment. But the online programs really lend themselves to connect to making this a global community. So we have members, who are basically gathered together from all over the world, which is pretty amazing, from Australia to Asia to Europe to the Americas. And it's such a gift to, yeah, to be able to gather that way. And we actually have a prayer cycle, which some of your listeners might be interested in, which is a recording of basically 7 days of morning and evening prayer on different themes. And the theme, we've done 3 weeks of these prayer cycles, and the one we just completed is on Mary and the sacred feminine. And those are kind of the heart of like how you would pray in a monastic way, but done sort of Abbey style, Abbey the art style, meaning, with inclusive language and with, embracing of different traditions, and, yeah, a more sort of expansive, perhaps, way of praying.
Mm. How can listeners connect with that prayer cycle and get more information about all the good things that you offer?
Well, if you go to abbeyofthearts.com, there's a tab that says prayer cycle that you click, and it'll show you the 3 different weeks that we've created so far. And you can click on any of those. And we have audio podcasts, and for 2 of them, we have video podcasts as well. So my teaching partner, Betsy Beckman, she creates dances for the songs that we use. So if
Wow.
you're someone who wants to enter into the dance of it all, in a way that's guided, there's that option for you. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to, which you can get daily or weekly or monthly. And there's a little box that pops up for that. So that's probably the best way to connect and find out, what we're up to and the programs that we have going on.
You suggest that readers use the book. One way to use the book is as a retreat, one name for each day. How would we do that? How does that work?
Well, I would suggest, taking, committing to, say, maybe 20 to 30 minutes of prayer each day, either in the morning or the evening, or, you can mix it up depending if your schedule is inconsistent. And, basically spending, a little bit of time reading the reflection. And there's a section about calling on that name of Mary. So that's sort of a little more of an invitation into a little bit of an interior journey. So it helps to apply that in your own daily life. And then reading the blessing. And then, essentially to carry that image with you throughout your day. And to notice, are there dreams? Are there synchronicities? Maybe do a little bit of journaling. In the beginning of the book, there's some suggestions for various kind of creative responses that you might do in terms of visual art or writing or movement. So you can really, make it as kind of minimal as you need, or you could expand it out, to like a more full kind of retreat if you had more time in your day.
Christine, thank you so much for being with us. We just scratched the surface. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen. It's wonderful to be with you again.
I've been talking with Christine Valters Paintner. Her new book is Birthing the Holy, Wisdom from Mary to Nurture Creativity and Renewal. And you can find out more about Christine, about the book, and about the Abbey of the Arts community at abbeyofthearts.com. Click on that prayer cycle tab to see some of the new prayers that have been created. And you're always welcome at KarenHager.com. It's a good place to find out about upcoming classes and events. And you're always welcome to book a private session with me if it feels aligned. If you are looking for intuitive guidance on your own spiritual journey, if you are looking for insight that comes from a deeper place that helps you find those deeper places, you're very welcome to book a session with me. You can use the coupon code podcast when you're booking to save 20%. It's my way of thanking you for listening to the show and telling your friends, because you are telling your friends, right, about the podcast. Here's how to use that coupon code. You go to KarenHager.com, click the book a reading button, choose a session of any length, enter your name and email address. Now, here's the fun part. Are you ready? Click the green box that says have a coupon code. You do. It's podcast. Type in podcast. You'll see the 20% off applied at checkout. And thank you for listening today. Together, we are spreading a little more light in the world, and a little more light is always a good thing. Until next time, I'm wishing you peace.